Hello, everybody. I'm here with George Wright. George is a professor of management science at the University of Strathclyde. He is a very prolific and influential author in the fields of scenario planning, management science, and decision making. He is, in fact, one of the most productive and most cited authors in the world in the topic area of scenarios. George has advised dozens of private and public organizations on how to use scenario planning. He is also the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Behavioral Decision Making and the editor-in-chief of the recently launched Wiley journal, Futures and Foresight Science, of which we're going to talk about today. George, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Alex. I look forward to talking a little bit about the new journal.
Thanks. So Futures and Foresight Science is definitely one of the most promising and emerging journals in the field of futures and foresight. And I thought it would be nice to have this conversation to give some further visibility to this great journal. So why don't we start from an introduction? Why don't you give us a brief introduction of what the journal is and of what is the scope and the vision of the journal?
Okay, thanks, Alex. So the journal is a Wiley journal, which I think is important because Wiley is a great publisher, and it has a bundle subscription base of journals at libraries across the world. So Futures and Foresight Science is within those bundles. The journal itself is now headed for its 5th year of publication. So there are 4 years of issues that are available on the Futures and Foresight web pages. And its focus is maybe slightly different from many of quite a wide range of futures journals that are out there at the moment. Its focus is really on methods, not just showing what a method is, but talking about how to improve methods. And the articles really are science-based articles, science-based in the sense that there is evidence to suggest maybe an improvement or a nuance on a method, for instance, that makes it a better method. So we've had lots of recent articles, say, on the Delphi method and how to improve that, and issues to do with wording of Delphi statements, etc. We've had papers on scenarios, how to define scenarios, for instance, and how to improve the scenario method. So it focuses on methods of anticipation. So unlike the forecasting area, which is a slightly different area where you can make a forecast of maybe the quantitative variable and look to see what happens and make an evaluation of the quality of the forecast by the outcome data. When we're looking into the future in terms of anticipation with multiple futures or viewpoints, there's no outcome measure necessarily, especially as the future may be 20 years out rather than just a few months out, as in the forecasting area. So it's really about methods for anticipation and how to improve them. And it's got science in the title because we're trying to make it a bit more rigorous, the method evaluation. The method evaluation won't be outcome based, but it will be evaluating the process maybe of a method, or the social dynamics of what goes on, and trying to improve methods. And so it's all about evidence bases really. And so if you look at the list of topics on the Futures and Foresight website, you'll see there's a range of areas. Scenarios I've mentioned, Delphi I've mentioned. Judgmental probability forecasting's in there as well because it's about human judgment. So there are some outcome measures with that. But it's also about expert judgment as well, because experts are used in scenarios and Delphi, but also in judgmental forecasting. Does expertise have an impact on the quality of the forecast? Also, corporate and organizational foresight, because organizations, not just individuals, are interested in improving their anticipation. And linked to that area perhaps is horizon scanning, looking for weak signals perhaps of a future that might be very positive or very negative for an organization and its viability. So those areas are in there as well. So combination of judgments from experts or groups of individuals are in there. But also, importantly, the combination of methods as well, combining Delphi with scenarios, or maybe combining multi-attribute utility analysis as a way of evaluating decisions against scenarios. We've had a few papers on that topic as well. So we're interested in anticipating the future, but also then methods for aiding decision making when the future is much more uncertain than where you can make a forecast. So that's our area. We're interested in evidence bases, and we're interested in publishing the best papers we can.
Thanks, George. That's excellent. So let me add to that in this scope, Futures and Foresight Science is perhaps unique because other journals in the larger field of future studies and foresight do not necessarily focus on methods. And with the burgeoning increase in methods of different kinds, it's really excellent to have an avenue to keep track and collate new methodologies and add some rigor to them. So great that we have that. So let me ask you this. Obviously, the major pool of intended authors for the journal is foresight researchers and practitioners. Why would foresight researchers and practitioners and scholars be interested to publish in this journal? Why would they be interested to write for Futures and Foresight Science?
Well, there are advantages and disadvantages, Alex. Let me say what the disadvantages are first. It's a new journal, and that's a disadvantage perhaps in terms of it doesn't have an impact factor yet, and it's not fully listed in all the abstracting databases. But remember, Wiley is behind this journal, and it's getting now into the indexes, and Wiley see it as soon becoming part of the Scopus, citation count, impact factor thing. So while it's behind it, I think that's why it's going forward. But it is new. It's only moving into its 5th year of publication. The key thing I think for the authors is well, if you're an author submitting, then you can look at the editorial board and see that all the top names really in the area are there. So, in the scenario area, we've got the top people. In the Delphi area, we've got the top people. In the horizon scanning area, we've got the top people, corporate foresight, etc., etc. So that the top people are reading your article if you publish in Futures and Foresight Science because they're on the editorial board. So then they've probably refereed it as well because we use the editorial board to produce the referees. So therefore, if you've got something good as a new author, the people who will cite your work are reading it, necessarily because they're part of the journal. So I think that's a positive. The other thing is we publish these scientific papers, and that's our main emphasis, but we also publish insights from practice. We call them reflections from practice. So these are more practitioner pieces, but rather than a practitioner talking about how well I did in a particular consultancy application, the reflections from practice area is looking at the difficulties in practice and how to overcome them. So for instance, a key area in scenarios is trying to get the senior decision makers involved because they are time poor. They don't have very much time. And if you're doing a scenario exercise, it's great to get the senior people involved who actually make the decisions. So you can imagine a paper in the reflections from practice area. It talks about how best to get the senior people involved with a scenario exercise, how to make it attractive to them. So that would be, a good reflections from practice piece, trying to improve practice in terms of insights from practitioners. So there's the scientific papers, which is the main emphasis, but also this reflections from practice. We also have, as you're well aware, Alex, these sort of focal papers where a paper is published. In your case, it was, key focal paper, and we gain commentaries, again, mainly from the editorial board, that make comments about aspects of a focal paper. And the authors of the focal paper also get to write a rejoinder to those commentaries. So we get a debate going on in the journal about a key area of interest. So one area of interest recently was Paul Schumacher's work on using history to produce scenarios. Scenarios are about the future, but history is about the past. That particular area then, he wrote a focal paper on, and people made comments. And he talked about, for instance, the use of scenarios in South Africa at the time to transition to black majority rule. And we had, one of the guys out there in South Africa who was part of that initial scenario project talking about, what Paul was saying, etc., etc. So I think that adds to the interest and adds to the debate, looking at different perspectives around a focal paper. So publishing in FNFS, we don't have the impact factor yet, but we will do because of Wiley. We have a great editorial board, which means, if you've got a great paper, it will be read by the people who are very significant in the field. And we have these, two types of papers: the science papers, the reflections from practice. But within the science papers, we also have these, focal papers where there are commentaries attached as well, again from key figures in the area. So that's why it should be attractive, Alex.
Thanks for that, George. Yeah, let me add to that. I actually have much appreciated the diversity of the papers in the journal myself. As a reader of the journal, it seems to me that Futures and Foresight Science is not limited to the typical hypothetical deductive style of papers that would see light, majorly see light in management journals. There are a lot of different papers of different styles. So reading the journal actually is an experience in and of itself, because there are case studies, methodological papers, responses to focal papers. So it is an interesting experience from the reader as well. Okay, another question for you, George. Futures and Foresight Science in organizations can be ascribed to the larger field of management, insofar as these processes and practices are indeed happening in organizations. So Futures and Foresight Science as a journal is also catering to those management researchers that want to publish about organizational foresight. What do you have to say to them? What do you say to those authors in the management field that are considering to explore foresight, organizational foresight, as an area of research and to publish papers in that area? What would you say to them? What is the attractiveness of Futures and Foresight Science to that pool of authors?
Well, thanks, Alec. That's an interesting question as well. I think the first thing to say is that if I was, a general management researcher, say in, corporate strategy maybe, or strategic thinking,
right,
and also I was teaching that course on strategic thinking and, a strategy maybe on an MBA program, if I looked at a typical, strategy book and looked for how many chapters were, concerned with thinking about the future, you'd find very, very small number. People would talk about the Pestel approach, political change, economic change, and it'd be quite a slim section. We did an analysis, myself and the co-authors, including George Burt, and we looked at we did an analysis of all the leading textbooks in strategy and how much was devoted to, the area of scenarios and futures thinking. And it was usually maybe about 3 or 4% of a particular, mainstream strategy textbook. So if you were an academic teaching strategy in a business school and you're interested in the future, because of course, if you think about it, organizations need to be able to cope with the future rather than sort of make decisions just about the present, then to know more about how to do that is important, and how to do it in a codified way such that you can, teach it in the business school, for instance, becomes important as well. So I think the first reason why a more general academic, interested in strategy and thinking about the future and would be interested in the journal is to find out more about this particular area that hasn't been yet fully developed in the strategy textbooks, but it will be once the knowledge area becomes a bit more codified. If you are an academic, though, as you're saying, who's doing more general strategy research and more general research in management, and you've done something on foresight, then of course, if you write that up for Futures and Foresight, you will be communicating with the people who focus on that area. And so if you've got something to add, again, you'll reach the people who are the best in the world in that particular area in terms of, their own impact, etc. So I think the journal both satisfies a need of knowing more by a more generalist management academic about this particular area. It's so important if you think about it, but previously wasn't very well codified, and so people couldn't do scenarios in an MBA class because they didn't quite know how to do it. And also, if you are actually doing work on Futures and Foresight as a management academic, you can communicate with the the authors who focus on that area, who are on the editorial board of the journal. So I think that's the major reason why somebody who's a bit more general in their approach to Futures and Foresight has a tangential interest would want to know more about the journal.
Thanks, George. Yes, absolutely huge synergies there between strategies and foresight. We've seen it recently. I guess with the pandemic, there's been an inflation of scenarios. You have also written about this. So I guess the attention is slowly bending our way, and hopefully more management scholars will be looking into foresight.
Questions for you, Alec. So I'm, very happy to answer your questions, but it's nice for you to agree to answer some of mine as well. So I think what you'll give, hopefully, in your answers is, the view of an author who's actually published in Futures and Foresight Science. What made the journal attractive to you? So, perhaps on the experience of the review process. Was it good? Was it poor? Was it, long-winded, or what? How was it?
Thanks for asking, George. Yeah, actually, my experience was very interesting because when I first heard of the journal, it was probably at the very beginning of its journey in 2018. I didn't know about it and I wanted to give it a try. So I decided to send an article I had about a foresight method to it. And I was positively surprised to have a response of 3 very detailed reviewers. And the whole review process didn't take much time. I didn't drag more than 4 months. That's, I think, what I remember from that. And after 2 rounds, a decision was made, which I think is critical. And I want to compare this to many other journals where oftentimes the review process is dragged for more than 2 rounds. So I particularly appreciated that first round of review. So I decided to keep submitting my articles to the journal. And I have to say that so far, I think I wrote 4 articles for the journal, and the review process has not disappointed me so far. It was always quite reasonable in time, and the quality has always been really up to standard, with at least 3 reviewers providing very useful feedback. So that's my feedback. That's my experience of the review process.
Well, that's interesting. Actually, as you mentioned earlier, I also edit the journal Behavioral Decision Making, which is another Wiley journal. And, that's well established. It's been going, I think, maybe now for about 35, 40 years almost. The review process on that is exactly the same as what I've instigated in Futures and Foresight Science. Always 3 referees, always 3 good reports. And also the referees' reports will be with the author within 6 weeks. That's not a guarantee, but it's as near a guarantee as it could take. With the journal Behavioral Decision Making, what I've done there is if people don't turn around the reports within the 6 weeks, as referees, then I don't use them again. So, and people are quite keen to be on the editorial board of journal Behavioral Decision Making. So I can very much select and make sure the process is good. Less true, of course, with a new journal, that you can do that sort of thing. But we're trying to reach that sort of standard, and I think we should be able to do it. So for an author, it's going to take 6 weeks to get a first decision with 3 reports, 3 referees' reports that are strong, that are useful. And, then the second revision probably takes maybe roughly the same time, perhaps. But it's quite quick, and it's comprehensive and gold standard in terms of 3 reviews reports. But what I'm not doing as an editor is sort of, doing a head count of the reviews and what they say. I'm actually reading it myself, of course, as well. And because there are less papers coming into Futures and Foresight Science, because it is new, I've got time to do that. And so things are done hopefully very well to improve manuscripts that can be improved. And most manuscripts can be improved. So it's very much a developmental approach rather than, just say it's no good or it's good. We could actually improve the papers. Alex, that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks for pushing that standard. Well, let me also tell you about my experience as a reader, perhaps, because I am a regular reader of the journal and I have appreciated many of its articles. Well, I think the first thing I should say is that some of the most foundational articles in the field have been published in the journal. And I'm talking about articles such as the article by Spaniel and Rowland about defining scenarios. That is perhaps one article that is foundational to anyone who wants to practice and research foresight. Or about the article that you mentioned by Paul Shoemaker about how to use historical analysis in foresight processes. Or even more recently, there was an article, I think it was written by Mills and Wilner, about the importance of value systems in scenarios, which is arguably one of the most foundational component of scenario planning, how the value system of a society changes in the future, right? So these articles are very important and they have been already cited dozens and dozens of times. And the journals is one of the youngest journals in the field. So this is definitely speaking to the journal quality. I myself have cited those articles several times. And usually when I'm asked for key readings about futures and foresight by beginners, chances are I will direct them to one or two or three key readings in the journal Futures and Foresight Science. So that's probably one thing that I wanted to mention about it.
Okay, thanks, Alex. It's worth saying that, because it's a Wiley journal, it's very, very comprehensive, the access, through the website. So what you can do on the Futures and Foresight website is look at the most recent articles, and the values article you mentioned is recent. And you can click next to it and see, how many times an article's been cited and the ordering of the citation counts, etc. And the article on defining scenario, as you say, is one of the most widely cited. I think you'll see the other ones coming up as well. And that's an indicator, of course, also that Scopus will take the journal on because the papers are becoming well cited, or because, of course, the readership and the editorial board, etc. So things are well set, I think, for a strong future. But of course, we are still a young journal, as you know, Alex.
Yeah.
So it's into a fifth year this coming year.
Awesome to hear. Well, journal impact factor is definitely not the only thing, but I acknowledge it's super important. So I really do look forward to see what the impact factor of this journal will be. Okay. Thanks for your time, George, and thanks for the great work you're doing with this journal and for pushing the standards of the field with it. I appreciate that. And I hope it will continue as it is because the quality is great. And if it continues, it's very likely to become the top journal in the field. And I hope I'll be able to have the privilege to keep writing for the journal.
Well, thank you, Alex, for the papers you have sent in, the papers we have published of yours, which again, some of the best papers in the journal. So it's great. So hopefully everything works, but of course, as I say, we're young, and it may, as you say, may flourish, but I think it will. Everything's set for that. But of course, it may not as well, because you've got to think about different scenarios.
Yeah, multiple futures ahead. Well, with that, thanks, George, and take care. All the best.
Thank you very much indeed.